Hi, I'm Will Hearst. Welcome to the New West today. Our special guest is going to be Phil Bronstein. Phil has been the editor of the San Francisco Examiner and the San Francisco Chronicle. He is currently running the Center for Investigative Reporting, which is the premier organization that does independent third-party news gathering and investigative reporting. And we're going to talk a little bit today about journalism and what's happening in that world today and what is possible in the new kind of journalism that Phil is doing at CIR. Please welcome Phil Bronstein. Now, investigative reporting is one of the things you don't get as a commodity, which is why I think it's interesting that it has kind of, in a new form, continued to find support, both reader support and I think you have a lot of your customers for CIR, for the center, are news organizations that are kind of outsourcing the investigation to you.
Right, but they're also news sources that are themselves crumbling. So our clients for a long time, people who were paying us, organizations that were paying us money for our content, are no longer able to do that because as the sort of old media is dying out, we used to talk about newspapers like the guy in the old Henry Africa's bar, which was one of the most popular bars in San Francisco, dying at 10 p.m., but he doesn't fall over until 2 a.m. when everybody leaves. You know, it's like newspapers are dead. They just haven't acknowledged it yet, and they just haven't gotten to the point where they're falling over. So we had to look at CIR. We had to look at who are the new customers, who are the new partners, because we partner with everybody. And the new partners, I mean, it's emerging because
well, you're going directly to the reader in some cases, right? I mean,
well,
you're
yes.
not wholesaling investigations to news organizations. You're
we
presenting
were.
it. Yeah, but you do both, I guess.
We were, and then it was our view that we should have an identity of our own, that we should have a product that was uniquely ours but available to a lot of people. So we have a radio show pilot now called Reveal. It's on 170 public radio stations.
So you're doing multimedia. You're doing video and audio and packages and.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that differentiates. We're also doing things like Tech Rake, which is a combo of journalists and technologists who get together, whether it's SoundCloud or Twitter or Google, and think about how can these technologists help us solve these issues of journalism. I do think that we don't want to ignore the public we're supposed to serve. Right. And so you want to have, so if we do a story that is about state hospitals and abuse of this state police force of patients in state hospitals.
Which you did do.
Which we did do. And then we had follow-ups that included town hall meetings in Sonoma and Southern California, which were directly affected, in which we didn't want to tell people, here's what you should do, because that is advocacy. But there's a sort of activist journalism.
Yeah, right.
What actually your grandfather called journalism of action.
Yeah.
And he may, in his view, that may have been, invading Cuba, but we take a slightly liberating Cuba, liberating everybody in the jails over there. But in our perspective, we borrowed the phrase journalism of action to mean we help people, because if you write a really good story or you broadcast a really good story, you're going to move people, right? They're going to want to do something about it. And if your motivation is to make people's lives better, that's the general sense of investigative reporting. You fix things that are broken.
Right.
The role of a public official is not just to serve the public, oftentimes not, look at Rob Ford, a lot who aren't serving the public, but to create mythology. That's why there are press conferences, press releases, press secretaries. They spin everything.
Yeah.
And then they sell it, and they're really good at it. So our job is to pull back the curtain. Their job is to obfuscate a little bit and make sure that the news is the way they want it. So that's a relationship that should exist.
I was reading something the other day where I think it was the Obama administration was doing their own press conferences and issuing their own photographs and not letting reporters into certain meetings. And this seems to be a trend because the technology of the internet and mass communications is now being adopted by press agents and public relations experts.
As it should.
Which was an inevitable development.
Inevitable. And the Obama administration, of course, has been worse in terms of going after the press and its sources than all previous administrations combined. They've taken more action under Eric Holder in the Justice Department and Obama. So, you know, this idea that journalists lean to the left by nature in general, you know, if that's true, then Obama is a disappointment to journalists for a whole nother set of reasons. They've really been tough.
It was reasonable, it seems to me, for Snowden to say, there is no whistleblower protection. If I surface this information to the press, because he never got, to our knowledge, paid by a foreign government or paid by a press organization. So his motive had to be, in his own mind, you know, exposing information that was in the dark.
Yeah, I mean, the conundrum for journalists with Edward Snowden is, you know, is the whole traitor issue. Is it appropriate? And, you know, we take a sort of snooty position in a sense, but appropriate one with a lot of these leakers. They're like, hey, if the information is good, you know, we're not going to care where it came from. And the reality is that without Snowden, we would not have had a national debate, and policy on the NSA and secrecy and collection of data has changed as a result.
Yeah, no question about it.
I can tell you that as a newspaper editor, and you should say what your perspective is as a former editor and publisher, my view was there were three things that three circumstances where I would consider not publishing something. One, if it had to do with minors.
Yeah, right.
Two, if it had to do with imminent potential harm to people. And people were going to die instantly if you put something in the paper. And number three were, you know, national security, really serious national security issues. But I would
be reluctant to publish the names of agents who are undercover.
Well, I think there have been instances where the press has held a story while an operation was in progress, so that they wouldn't ruin the operation. The operation wouldn't fail. And there are people who will push back even on that standard.
Well, you've had your own anonymous source in the shooter series that you did for Esquire, where the soldier, the Navy SEAL, who actually entered the room with Osama bin Laden and fired the fatal shot, his name has not been disclosed, although all the facts of the story have been disclosed, and you've put your reputation on the line that you're being told the truth and you're printing accurate information.
Reputation such as it is, yes. Right, yeah.
Read our disclaimer.
Well, I mean, we had that.
So there's information that you would choose not to publish, or that you agreed not to publish.
Well, I think that there was
Is that an anonymous source, or is that a...
The issue was...
He's not in the service anymore.
Right. And
so he's not undercover. You wouldn't be disclosing someone who's in imminent danger, or do you think?
No, I mean, the shooter had to think about the fact that he entered into certain agreements with the U.S. government when he became a Navy SEAL,
right,
and a member of SEAL Team 6 about disclosure of information, as all special operators do.
And he was in the armed services.
Yeah, I mean, he's a Navy SEAL.
Right.
And so he had to make a determination. I mean, technically, you're supposed to submit anything that you want to put in writing, that publish, to the government for review. So if you're, you know, Admiral Casey, or, you know, you're one of these guys, you're a general who wants to write a book, I mean, the government can keep that under review for years. And so the shooter made a decision that most of the story had already been told, much of it by the Obama administration, and much of it to the filmmakers of Zero Dark 30.
That's a point.
Right?
Yeah.
And so he felt that he was not disclosing anything that was still secret.
Yeah.
Now, the government could have decided to go after him, and may still go after him.
For technical reasons. But
but
on balance, I think he's right.
Yeah, I think he's right, too. At one point, someone who now runs a major news organization was actually talking about what we're actually going to do is get rid of all the journalists, and we're just going to have news organizations that will service other organizations, and our salespeople will be experts in selling search engine optimization and search engine marketing. And so everybody's like panic. This is the panic moment where everybody's going like, oh my God, we have to grab onto something. Oh, it's clicks. Well, guess what? It turns out it's not really about clicks. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Is it?
I went to a conference over the weekend where the reporter who works for the Orange County Alternative Press was saying that he's asked to do listicles which are kind of clickbait, where you go down and you click different things.
I hear that and I think of something else entirely. Yeah. Okay. Yes, listicles.
But why I don't think that's an enduring idea is because I think it's a commodity. And if the top 20 places to buy ice cream is a news story, then everybody will do their own top 20 list.
But then why does BuzzFeed, which apparently is profitable, made $120 million in revenue last year, why is BuzzFeed continuing their listicles and hiring serious reporters to create a serious news organization? How is that?
Well, maybe they're onto something.
Well, but like, what do you think? I mean, does that fit together?
I just don't know how commodity information in a world where you can get it from so many different places can be an enduring business advantage.
Right.
I think you have to specialize, and you have to have something as nearly unique as you can. That's kind of my business view. I could be wrong.
All right. So then, from the business perspective, if you think of Twitter, lost I think $500 million in the last quarter of last year, is occasionally be profitable for like a day or two. I mean, how do you imagine these things evolving?
Well, the theory of those things was, in my mind, best articulated by Vinod Khosla. We were partners in a venture capital partnership, and a guy came in that had phenomenal traffic, and somebody around the table was saying, "Well, what's the profit plan? You know, how is this thing going to become a business?" And Vinod said, "If you give me enough traffic, I'll figure out some way to make it profitable." And I think that's kind of what's driving some of the internet acquisition prices. If you give me this fire hose of traffic and behavior, I will eventually figure out some way to do it.
Right. So Google figured it out, and it was
Right.
about search, and it was about advertising.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, my friend John Doerr said that all internet success stories are based on finding a needle in a haystack. And if you make a list of the successful companies, a lot of them are like that. Not all of them. Twitter, for example, is not about finding a needle in a haystack. I do think it is an open question to what degree Silicon Valley is going to step forward and play the role that their predecessors played. It's starting to happen. I see the names of some of these younger people now showing up on not-for-profit boards, and I think they're there out of interest as well as generosity. So the jury's out. But for the last decade, they've had deep pockets and short arms. But I do think there are people, whether it's Bezos or Marisa Mayer or other people who really, Eric Schmidt, who really do care about these things. I don't know exactly what they're all doing, but I sense that their interest is genuine and their desire to make a difference is genuine in this sort of famine that we're experiencing, because it used to be, as you pointed out earlier today, that there were hundreds of organizations reporting from foreign capitals, and the number of news organizations that had Washington bureaus was in the dozens.
Right.
Now it's very, very different. A lot of television news is B-roll shot by freelancers. A lot of the commentary is two experts, not two newsmakers. There's not much anymore that isn't in this sort of opinion format. So if that's your source of news, you have to be aware that you're getting very digested. And so what typically happens is you say, well, I'm conservative, so I'm just going to listen to Fox because that talks to me the way
Right.
I think the world works. And if you're progressive, then you say, well, I'm going to listen to MSNBC and Rachel Maddow because that seems to me the way the world works, and I'm just not even going to tune in Fox.
All right. So are we getting to the point where
But that's not news.
where
That's-
billionaires, very wealthy people are the sort of saviors in this time period before we discover what is the business model that involves original content?
Well, there's always been wealthy people that have a cause that they're promoting, right? You have the Koch brothers doing one thing, and we have Tom Steyer starting his own green fund. I mean, they will disseminate information, but those aren't news organizations. Those are public advocacy groups like the Sierra Club
Right.
or the Heritage Foundation.
Right, but then
They
you have
disseminate
Omidyar.
news, they do reports, they hire people, but it's very much slanted to the House opinion.
It's sponsored content.
It's sponsored content, okay.